serious, analytical tone. Adolf Hitler was driven by a terrifying ideological obsession, the supposed superiority of a pure Aryan race. This map shows the geographic reality of that ideology. He believed the only way to ensure the expansion of this race was through Lebensraum, or living space. The plan required the Greater German Reich to aggressively conquer everything to its east, carving a path straight through Poland and Russia until hitting the Ural Mountains. Between 1925 and the height of World War II, they actually managed to execute a massive portion of this plan. By counting both civil and military occupied zones, the territory under their control exploded from 469,000 to 2.7 million square kilometers. That temporarily made it the 10th largest country on the planet. Despite controlling a massive percentage of the European continent, the regime completely shattered. The sheer scale of their early expansion leaves us with a chilling historical scenario to consider. What would have happened if they hadn't made the catastrophic strategic errors that guaranteed their collapse? Germany's early momentum stalled against a severely underprepared wartime economy and the fatal decision to fight a brutal war on two fronts simultaneously. In the east, they stretched their supply lines thin across the freezing Russian landscape, leading directly to massive military failures in key battles like Kursk and Stalingrad. Then came the final nail in the coffin, declaring war on the United States. This immediately brought the overwhelming weight of American industrial manufacturing and manpower down on their already fracturing forces. But if we rewind the timeline to erase those specific missteps, the war takes a radically different path. Surviving the 1940s required the regime to pause its rigid ideological goals in favor of strict, calculated pragmatism against enemies that held nearly all the global resources. Because invading an island without sea and air superiority is nearly impossible, a successful Western strategy required winning the Battle of Britain and trapping the Allied forces at Dunkirk. Those victories would have likely forced the British Empire into a negotiated peace. Over in the Soviet Union, survival required deploying with adequate winter clothing and actively recruiting captured populations who already resented Soviet rule. Economically, they would have to completely abandon other distractions and make capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus their absolute top priority to keep their tanks and planes running. This chart illustrates why, even with a flawless European campaign, an invasion of the United States was mathematically impossible. The US held a massive advantage in population, and its economy alone was larger than all the Axis powers combined. Unless Germany developed the atomic bomb first, total global domination was a fantasy. The absolute best outcome they could achieve was a hostile, permanent stalemate across the Atlantic Ocean. With the active fighting frozen, Hitler and Heinrich Himmler would have the peacetime environment necessary to fully activate their general plan for the East, attempting to colonize their new territories with 10 million Germans over 25 years. This data visualization breaks down the staggering demographic reality of that plan. It required the systematic murder of roughly 110 million Slavs, the deportation of 15 million to Siberia, and the enslavement of 54 million to serve as bonded labor. We also have to account for the 4 million Jewish people who were still living in these regions at the time. Under Nazi control, they would meet the exact same fate as the 6 million already murdered. The true terror emerges when you look at the totals. World War II killed roughly 80 million people. This peacetime plan adds 114 million casualties on top. A victorious Nazi peace would have been significantly deadlier than the bloodiest war in human history. The resulting Cold War between the United States and this European megastate would play out in the shadows. America would pour heavy funding into Russian partisans, intentionally bleeding the German occupation forces through endless proxy battles. The cultural explosions of the 1960s and 70s, the sexual revolution, the hippie movement, and modern art would simply not exist in Europe. Any participation in these movements would be strictly punished as an illegal underground rebellion. The geography of nuclear tension shifts as well. Instead of a missile crisis in Cuba, the flashpoint likely moves to Iceland. Sitting deep within the German sphere, it would serve as the perfect launch pad for mid-range missiles aimed directly at the east coast of North America. The global conflict wouldn't end. It would trade the muddy trenches of Europe for decades of extreme cultural suppression and constant nuclear brinkmanship. This map illustrates what that empire would look like today if it managed to hold on to those borders. It would be the fourth most populated country on Earth, with a massive GDP of roughly $9 trillion, placing it right behind the US and China. But the cracks in the foundation show up in the per capita income. Spread across its massive, subjugated population, the average citizen's wealth drops to about $33,000 a year. That places their standard of living closer to modern Belarus, revealing deep, systemic poverty. Over decades, the American free market and the innovation of an open society would inevitably outproduce a heavily sanctioned, rigid command economy. An empire entirely reliant on forced labor, ethnic cleansing, and the constant subjugation of its own people is economically unviable. Surviving the 1940s might have bought them time, but the sheer, crushing weight of their own brutal system guaranteed they would eventually collapse.